It wasn't a drug overdose, a plane crash, or even creative burnout. What nearly killed Pink Floyd was a contract. In 1985, Roger Waters, the band's driving force, walked away. But instead of ending Pink Floyd, his exit triggered a brutal war over the band's name, the money, and the legacy. Millions were on the line. The courts got involved. And it all came to a head, not in a courtroom, but on a houseboat. This is the untold story of the contract that sparked betrayal, lawsuits, and the fight to keep one of rock's most iconic bands alive. The tensions began years earlier. In 1983, Pink Floyd released The Final Cut, an album that barely felt like a band effort at all. For the first time since 1971, David Gilmour received 0 songwriting credits. Waters dominated every decision, later describing the album as my solo project with guest musicians. The band that once created magic together now barely functioned as a unit. Behind the scenes, their record label watched with growing concern. Pink Floyd owed them another album under contract, and millions in advances hung in the balance. That obligation would soon become a ticking time bomb. While Waters publicly declared the band a spent force creatively in interviews, Gilmour seethed in private. Their relationship deteriorated with each passing day. Studio sessions became battlegrounds of creative control. In December 1985, Waters made his move, announcing his departure from Pink Floyd. He assumed this would dissolve the band entirely. He was wrong. The record company maintained their contract wasn't with Roger Waters. It was with Pink Floyd as a business entity. If no album materialized, breach of contract loomed as a very real possibility. Gilmour saw an opportunity. After years of watching Waters take control, he could finally reclaim the band. With drummer Nick Mason's support, he made a decision that stunned the music world. Pink Floyd would continue without its primary songwriter. Later, they invited Richard Wright, the keyboard player Waters had forced out during the recording of The Wall in 1979, to rejoin as a session musician for their 1987 album. The battle lines were drawn. Waters believed Pink Floyd couldn't exist without him. Gilmour was determined to prove him wrong, but how do you replace the creative force behind Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall? And what would happen when Waters discovered his former bandmates planned to continue using the name he considered dead? Waters responded decisively. In October 1986, he filed legal action in London's High Court to prevent Gilmour and Mason from using the Pink Floyd name. His argument was straightforward. Pink Floyd's identity came from his concepts. He pointed to Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall as evidence of his creative dominance. Without his vision, he claimed, it couldn't be Pink Floyd anymore. Gilmour and Mason quickly countersued. Their legal team built a different narrative. Pink Floyd's iconic sound came from their collective musical talents. Gilmour's soaring guitar solos and Mason's distinctive drumming were just as essential as Waters' lyrics. The band was more than one man's vision. The Pink Floyd name, a gateway to millions in annual earnings, was at stake. Gilmour risked losing their audience, while Waters feared for his solo career. As the case moved through the courts, legal complexities emerged around the band's partnership agreement. Waters' lawyers argued he had the right to dissolve the partnership entirely. Gilmour's team countered that since Waters had already quit, he couldn't exercise such rights. Legal fees likely mounted into hundreds of thousands of pounds, with both sides facing significant daily costs. Meanwhile, record executives grew increasingly impatient about their advance. Where was the album they'd paid for? Behind closed doors, Gilmour had already started recording. He gambled everything on the belief that Waters wouldn't win. If he lost the case, those recordings would be worthless, and Pink Floyd would be finished forever. As 1987 progressed, the judge prepared to rule on the case. The entire music industry watched closely. Could one founding member legally kill a legendary band? Or would Pink Floyd survive its internal civil war? By late 1987, both sides were exhausted, financially and emotionally. With no end in sight, the battle threatened to drag on for years. Something had to give. Gilmour proposed an unusual solution. He invited Waters to his floating recording studio, the Astoria, moored on the River Thames. The setting was deliberately intimate. No lawyers, no managers, just the three original members face to face. They met on December 23, 1987. For hours, they argued, negotiated, and eventually compromised. Without lawyers present, the conversation turned raw and personal. They revisited their shared history and the harsh realities of their situation. Mounting legal fees and label pressure left little room to maneuver. At this point, it wasn't about victory. It was about escaping collapse. Hours of raw, lawyer-free negotiation led to a breakthrough, something no courtroom had managed to produce. Gilmour and Mason would keep the Pink Floyd name and continue as a band. Waters would retain full rights to the Wall concept and his solo works. They would split royalties from the back catalog according to their original agreements. The most bitter legal battle in rock history ended not in a courtroom, but on a houseboat. The settlement involved formal contracts, but the framework emerged from this face-to-face meeting. None of them realized then that this unconventional settlement would set a precedent for band breakups for decades to come. Nor could they imagine the staggering financial implications that would unfold in the coming years. What drove these former friends to make peace after such a bitter war? And which side would ultimately prove victorious in the battle for Pink Floyd's legacy? Critics dismissed Pink Floyd's chances without Waters. Their new album, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, received mixed reviews, with many calling it Pink Floyd Light. Industry insiders predicted failure. What followed silenced the critics and redefined what Pink Floyd could be without its founding voice. Their comeback tour featured spectacular production values that dwarfed anything Waters was doing as a solo artist. A massive circular screen dominated the stage. Laser beams sliced through artificial fog. During Comfortably Numb, hospital beds suspended from aircraft cables created the illusion of patients floating above the audience. "We bet everything on this tour," Gilmour later admitted. If it failed, Pink Floyd would have been finished forever. The logistics were staggering. The crew needed days to assemble the stage. They transported the production in dozens of tractor trailers. For nearly 200 shows across 15 months, these crews worked tirelessly, often sleeping in shifts. The tour grossed an estimated $100 million, far surpassing Waters' solo efforts, and securing Gilmour's Pink Floyd a place among the highest-grossing tours of the decade. Merchandise sales reportedly added millions more, substantial additional revenue beyond ticket sales, though exact figures remain unconfirmed. The ultimate validation came from the fans themselves. While critics debated whether this was real Pink Floyd, shows sold out within hours. Ticket prices soared on the secondary market. Fans made the call. Pink Floyd without Waters wasn't just viable. It was a stadium-filling money-printing machine. July 2nd, 2005. Hyde Park, London. Over 150,000 attended in person, with billions watching globally as the impossible happened before their eyes. Roger Waters walked onto the stage and stood beside David Gilmour. Nick Mason took his place at the drums. Richard Wright settled behind his keyboards. Pink Floyd, the classic lineup, together again after 24 years. For 22 minutes, the feuding stopped. Breathe, Money, Wish You Were Here, and Comfortably Numb flowed from the stage with the same haunting perfection that had defined their golden era. On television screens worldwide, billions of viewers witnessed what appeared to be a joyous reunion. Newspapers declared Pink Floyd reborn. Fans wept openly. Music critics called it the defining moment of Live 8. What the world didn't see. Behind the scenes, the reunion remained tense. The band maintained separate dressing rooms. Waters and Gilmour's communication remained strained. They arrived separately and departed the same way. Perhaps the most revealing moment came during "Wish You Were Here." As Wright played his keyboard parts flawlessly, the same Wright whom Waters had forced out years earlier, Waters briefly glanced over with an expression caught between admiration and regret. When Bob Geldof, Live 8's organizer, suggested a world reunion tour, Gilmour's response was immediate. "I've done the biggest charity gig of all time. Please don't ask me to do it again." What appeared to be a triumphant reunion was actually a carefully orchestrated farewell. But why would these feuding musicians agree to share a stage one final time? And which side truly benefited from this brief, illusory peace? Years later, a surprising confession emerged from an unlikely source. "I was wrong," Roger Waters admitted. "I was wrong to think that Pink Floyd would just die when I left." This admission came after decades of bitterness. But the financial scorecards tell a fascinating story about who really won the Pink Floyd war. The immediate aftermath favored Gilmour decisively. His version of Pink Floyd outsold Waters' solo albums by a substantial margin in the years following the split. While Waters played smaller venues, Gilmour's Pink Floyd filled stadiums. Then, in an extraordinary reversal of fortune, Waters' decision to retain full rights to The Wall proved to be his masterstroke. Between 2010 and 2013, his solo tours of The Wall grossed $458 million, a stunning vindication of his creative vision decades after the split. When Gilmour released The Endless River in 2014, the album debuted at #1 in 21 countries. This proved the Pink Floyd name still carried immense commercial power even decades later. Perhaps the most revealing insight came from Waters himself. "If I hadn't settled when I did, the financial repercussions would have wiped me out completely. Continuing the fight would have bankrupted him, regardless of whether he won in court." The 1987 settlement created a precedent that transformed how bands handle breakups. Legal experts now routinely cite the Pink Floyd case when advising groups on how to navigate splits while preserving both creative rights and business interests. The financial winners? Both of them, eventually. Waters' concepts fueled his later solo success, while Gilmour's stewardship of the Pink Floyd name allowed him to tour successfully for decades. But the personal cost proved incalculable. Richard Wright passed away in 2008, never living to see Waters' remarkable admission of regret. The chance for true reconciliation died with him. "We both lost something," Waters once reflected, "but we both found a way to keep going." When Waters left Pink Floyd in 1985, he believed he was ending the band's story. Instead, he set in motion one of music's most consequential legal battles. The Pink Floyd case fundamentally transformed how we understand bands themselves. Is a band its songwriter, its sound, its name? This battle proved no single member, not even the visionary behind Dark Side of the Moon, owns a group's legacy completely. The 1987 houseboat settlement now serves as the template for modern band breakups. Bands like the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac likely looked to the Pink Floyd model during their own conflicts. The financial figures reveal a surprising truth: both sides eventually won. Gilmour's successful tours validated the Pink Floyd name's enduring power. Waters' Wall tour, decades later, proved his creative vision had equal value. But these numbers hide a deeper question that haunts musicians to this day. What's worth more, a legendary name or the creative genius behind it? Can either truly exist without the other? After millions spent on lawyers, decades of bitterness, and incalculable creative possibilities lost to conflict, the Pink Floyd war ended with understanding that came too late. What might they have created if they'd found a way to work together? And what other legendary bands might implode under the weight of the same contract battles that nearly destroyed Pink Floyd?